Hello, this is day 98 of reading one canto of the Divine Comedy every day. We are on Paradiso, Canto 31, which I'll read from the Longfellow translation before giving some quick comments. In fashion, then, as of a snow-white rose, displayed itself to me the saintly host, whom Christ in his own blood had made his bride. But the other host, that flying sees and sings the glory of him who doth enamour it, and the goodness that created it so noble, even as a swarm of bees, that sinks in flowers one moment, and the next returns again, to where its labour is to sweetness turned, sank into the great flower, that is adorned with leaves so many, and thence reascended to where its love abideth evermore. Their faces had they all of living flame, and wings of gold, and all the rest so white, no snow unto that limit doth attain. From bench to bench, into the flower descending, they carried something of the peace and ardour which by the fanning of their flanks they won. Nor did the interposing twixt the flower and what was over it, of such plenitude of flying shapes, impede the sight and splendour, because the light divine so penetrates the universe according to its merit, that naught can be an obstacle against it. This realm, secure and full of gladsomeness, crowded with ancient people and with modern, unto one mark had all its look and love. O trinal light, that in a single star, sparkling upon their sight, so satisfies them, look down upon our tempest here below. If the barbarians, coming from some region that every day by Hellas is covered, revolving with her son whom she delights in, beholding Rome and all her noble works, were wonderstruck what time the Lateran above all mortal things was eminent. I, who to the divine had from the human, from time unto eternity, had come, from Florence to a people just and sane. With what amazement must I have been filled! Truly, between this and the joy, it was my pleasure not to hear, and to be mute. And as a pilgrim who delighteth him in gazing round the temple of his vow, and hopes some day to retell how it was, so through the living light my way pursuing, directed I mine eyes over all the ranks, now up, now down, and now all round about. Faces I saw of charity persuasive, embellished by his light and their own smile, and attitudes adorned with every grace. The general form of paradise already my glance had comprehended as a whole, in no part hitherto remaining fixed. And round I turned me with rekindled wish my lady to interrogate of things concerning which my mind was in suspense. One thing I meant, another answered me. I thought I should see Beatrice, and saw an old man, habited like the glorious people. Overflowing was he in his eyes and cheeks with joy benign, in attitude of pity, as to a tender father is becoming. And she, where is she? Instantly I said, whence he? To put an end to thy desire, me Beatrice hath sent from mine own place, and if thou lookest up to the third round of the first rank, again shalt thou behold her, upon the throne her merits have assigned her. Without reply I lifted up mine eyes, and saw her, as she made herself a crown, reflecting from herself the eternal rays. Not from that region which the highest thunders is any mortal eye so far removed, in whatsoever sea it deepest sinks, as there from Beatrice my sight, but this was nothing unto me, because her image descended not to me by medium blurred. O Lady, thou in whom my hope is strong, and who for my salvation didst endure in hell to leave the imprint of thy feet, of whatsoever things I have beheld, as coming from thy power and from thy goodness, I recognize the virtue and the grace. Thou from a slave hast brought me unto freedom, by all those ways, by all the expedients whereby thou hadst the power of doing it. Preserve towards me thy magnificence, so that this soul of mine, which thou hast healed, pleasing to thee, be loosened from the body. Thus I implored, and she, so far away, smiled, as it seemed, and looked once more at me. Then unto the eternal fountain turned. And said the old man, holy, that thou mayest accomplish perfectly thy journeying, whereunto prayer and holy love have sent me, fly with thine eyes all round about this garden, for seeing it will discipline thy sight farther to mount along the ray divine. And she, the Queen of Heaven, for whom I burn wholly with love, will grant us every grace, because that I, her faithful Bernard, am. As he who peradventure from Croatia cometh to gaze at our Veronica, who through its ancient fame is never sated, but says in thought that while it is displayed, My Lord Christ Jesus, God of very God, now was your semblance made like unto this? Even such was I while gazing at the living charity of the man who in this world by contemplation tasted of that peace. Thou son of grace, this jocund life, began he, will not be known to thee by keeping ever thine eyes below here on the lowest place, but mark the circles to the most remote, until thou shalt behold enthroned the queen to whom this realm is subject and devoted. I lifted up mine eyes, and as at morn the oriental part of the horizon surpasses that wherein the sun goes down, thus, as if going with mine eyes from vale to mount, I saw a part in the remoteness surpass in splendor all the other front. And even as there, where we await the pole that Phaeton drove badly, blazes more the light, and is on either side diminished, so likewise that Pacific oriflamme gleamed brightest in the center, and each side in equal measure did the flame abate. And at that center, with their wings expanded, more than 1,000 jubilant angels saw I, each differing in effulgence and in kind. I saw there at their sports and at their songs a beauty smiling, which the gladness was within the eyes of all the other saints. And if I had in speaking as much wealth as in imagining, I should not dare to attempt the smallest part of its delight. Bernard, as soon as he beheld mine eyes fixed and intent upon its fervid fervor, his own with such affection turned to her, that it made mine more ardent to behold. So I'll quickly go over what happens so that we can get into analyzing it. So Dante is surveying the rows, the celestial rows, where each of the saints of heaven has a seat. He sees angels all around the rows, moving between God and the rose itself, delivering, as it were, peace and love from one to the other, like bees around flowers. He wants to ask Beatrice about it. He wants to understand it better. So he turns around and sees Beatrice is not there. Instead, there is this guy, Saint Bernard, who explains that Beatrice asked him to be the one to explain the rose to him, to make sure that he's able to come to full communion with God in this moment. He begins by enjoining Dante to search through the rows until he sees Mary, Queen of Heaven, seated at the top of the rows. Now, as always, Dante uses both classical and Christian examples to explain what he's feeling, to explain his amazement. He says, it would be as if a barbarian from the far north had come to see Rome for the first time, or as if a pilgrim, if there's the Christian example, finally arrived at his destination, at the church or temple of his destination, and was there wondering how he could possibly explain it to those who were left behind. Just like at the end of Purgatorio, where Virgil announcing that his task is done is quickly succeeded by him being switched out as a guide, in the same way, Beatrice announcing that her role is done as guide is quickly succeeded by her being switched out and another guide replacing her. In this case, it's Saint Bernard. Why Saint Bernard, you may ask? Now, Saint Bernard was the author of certain sermons on the Song of Songs, the book of the Bible written by King Solomon, where he describes the love between God and his people as if it were the love between a man and a woman. Bernard picks apart this book in his sermons and explains how you can see within the language of the Song of Songs the three stages of the medieval's spiritual life: purgation, illumination, and perfection. But since he's meditating specifically on the love of God, the perfection part represents full union with God. And Bernard refers to it here as perfect consummation. He's preparing Dante for perfect consummation, perfect communion with God when he finally looks up at him. So I suspect that is why Beatrice asked him, who was an expert on the subject, to explain to Dante what he's seeing and to prepare him for the greatest possible glimpse of the glories of heaven, so that when he returns to earth, he can write it down, of course, and more importantly, so that he can avoid ever getting to the same dark wood that he was in before, and he can return here at the end of his earthly life. Now we have 3 cantos remaining, and we have Saint Bernard to guard us through them, and he is known for using the medieval spiritual stages of purgation and illumination and perfection, and so I expect each one of those is going to play a role in each of the 3 cantos. And so it does in the case of this one. This would be purgation, in which Bernard enjoins Dante to raise his gaze higher. That's it. That's the purgation, where you move your gaze from lower things to higher things. But yes, he directs Dante to raise his eyes up to where Mary sits. She's at the peak of the rose, the highest possible seat. Looking upon her and praying to her is the prerequisite for looking up at Christ, at the divine. And so Dante begins to do so. And you may notice two things. Number one, we've met Mary before. She was at a different sphere of heaven, but now she's also here. So that definitely confirms there's bilocation going on. And then number two, Dante can actually make out her eyes and her face. He describes it as indescribable beauty, of course, but he can actually see her. He couldn't before, so he's already, in that short time since we last encountered her, his soul has already been more refined and formed so as to see what is here. Lastly, when Dante notices that Beatrice is no longer by his side and asks Bernard where she's gone, he directs him to where she is. She's pretty high up on the rose, and Dante thanks her with very beautiful words. I just want you to hear these one more time. O Lady, in whom all my hope takes strength, and who for my salvation did endure to leave her footprints on the floor of hell. Through your own power, through your own excellence, I recognize the grace and effect of all those things I've seen with my eyes. From bondage into freedom, you led me by all those paths, by using all those means which were within the limits of your power. Preserve me in your great munificence, so that my soul, which you have healed, may be pleasing to you when it slips from the flesh. And it's all true. She loved him enough to, yes, step down into hell, to find Virgil, to send to guide him, so that his soul might be healed, so that he can achieve heaven someday. If it sounds like he's making her sound a little bit more important than she is, almost makes her sound like Christ, that's exactly the point. She was Christ to him. From bondage into freedom you led me, a common metaphor between sin and virtue, just as it was between Egypt and Israel, or Jerusalem. He begs that whatever he gains through this mountaintop experience, shall we say, he's able to keep, so that he's able to return to heaven. Because it's not guaranteed that he will. He could see all of these wonderful things of heaven, as well as all the terrible things of hell, and still fall off the path once he goes back down to earth. It's entirely possible. So he prays for grace. That's all for today, though. I'll see you tomorrow.